Welcome, learner. Today we're doing a deep dive into the very blueprint of biology. Not just what biologists study, but how they think.
Exactly.
We're exploring the conceptual foundations of life science, and we're looking at it largely through the lens of Ernst Mayr, who really challenged the idea that biology is just a messy form of physics.
That's right. Our whole mission here is to distill the core concepts that, define modern biological thought.
Concepts that often clash with the old-school reductionist way of doing things.
Right, the methods you see in the physical sciences. We want to show you why you just can't understand life if you treat it exactly like you'd treat, say, a falling rock.
And what's so interesting, and what the sources make immediately clear, is this paradox in modern biology itself.
Oh, yeah?
Mayer points out that scientists are pushed towards this extreme specialization. I mean, you might be an expert on a single hormone, or the molecular structure of one very specific gene.
Right, but that hyperfocus can mean they lack the broader knowledge, outside that narrow field. It makes a true holistic view of the life sciences incredibly difficult to get.
So to unify things, you have to start with the philosophical split.
You do.
Okay, let's unpack that first, that really fundamental difference in how we approach the natural world. If you trace classical science back to the Greeks like Plato, Pythagorean geometry, it often suffered from what's called essentialism.
We're typological thinking.
Typological thinking, right.
Essentialism is, it's essentially the belief that natural diversity is just made up of fixed ideal types or classes, and they're all separated by these really sharp boundaries.
So if you think about physical laws like gravity, they're universal, they don't change.
Exactly. And essentialism tries to force biology into that same mold. The idea is that there's an ideal cat, and all the real cats you see are just imperfect variations of that one ideal.
But that view completely falls apart when you talk about evolution.
It does. It absolutely breaks down. Evolution is defined by change and variation. Biology just can't handle fixed types.
So what's the alternative?
The modern biological view requires population thinking. This view holds that the variation is the reality. Nature's diversity is just the sum of all these unique, variable individuals within a population.
So there is no ideal cat.
There is no ideal cat. There are only individual cats, and the population is defined by the statistical spread of their differences. And that's a radical idea. It basically replaces geometry with statistics as the standard of truth.
I can see why that would be a really difficult mental shift, especially for scientists who are steeped in deterministic physics.
It was notoriously difficult. Mayr actually talks about conversations he had with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who just could not get his head around the concept.
Really? How did he explain it?
He finally got Pauli to visualize it by asking him to imagine a gas made of only 100 molecules. But, and this is the key, every single one of those molecules had a unique velocity and direction.
So each particle was an individual.
Precisely. And those unique properties were fundamental to the gas. Pauli called it an individual gas. And that was the moment he got it. He realized that individuality and variation could be the basis of a system, not just random noise around a fixed average.
That shift in thinking, wow, that's really the philosophical starting point of modern biology.
It truly is.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the historical struggle that occupied philosophers for centuries. Just defining life.
Right. What is it?
Now, this wasn't just some academic debate. It led to two major and completely conflicting schools of thought trying to explain how a living thing actually works.
And the first really dominant view was mechanism and physicalism. This idea reached its peak with René Descartes back in the 17th century.
And the argument was that living organisms were no different from inanimate matter.
Basically, yeah. Just extremely complex machines that could be explained entirely by chemistry and physics.
But history throws a curveball here because Descartes was also really concerned with theological issues.
Oh, very much so. He had to avoid the very explosive problem of giving immortal souls to animals.
Because if they have souls, they might go to heaven.
Exactly. So to get around that, Descartes just declared all organisms except humans to be mere automatons, essentially elaborate clockwork machines.
That's such a powerful example of how external philosophy can just warp a scientific theory. But okay, if you take away the theological escape hatch, does that machine metaphor even hold up?
Not at all. As Mayr points out, the metaphor is just. It's incredibly superficial. I mean, think about any machine, a car, a clock.
Right.
Does it build itself? Does it develop from a single cell? Does it generate its own energy? Or, and this is the big one, does it program itself with instructions for its own future?
No, of course not.
No. The mechanism metaphor just fails because life has qualities that no mere machine can replicate.
So if mechanism failed, the immediate counter-movement was vitalism.
Vitalism. This popped up in the early 19th century, and it basically said there must be something extra. It claimed that living things had some kind of intangible vital force or vital fluid that you just don't find in non-living matter.
So people like J.F. Blumenbach thought this invisible force was as real as, say, Newton's gravity.
They did. They thought it was a real scientifically measurable thing, just like gravity or the old concept of caloric heat. It was their way of plugging the gap that physics and chemistry couldn't explain.
But that's also why it collapsed, right?
Yeah, it's exactly why it collapsed. As technology got better, scientists started explaining all these physicochemical processes at the cellular and molecular levels: metabolism, reproduction, heredity. And the vital force just became redundant.
You didn't need it anymore.
You didn't need an invisible force if you could explain every step with chemistry. It became untestable and totally unnecessary.
So if the vital force was dead and mechanism didn't work, what did biologists finally land on in the 1920s?
They landed on something called organicism. It was a kind of synthesis. It accepted that all the underlying molecular processes were purely physicochemical, but the thing that makes life special isn't its raw materials, its composition, but its incredibly complex organization.
Wait, but how does that escape the machine trap?
Yeah.
If it's all just physics and chemistry, isn't complex organization just another way of saying a complicated machine?
It escapes because of one single concept that defines all living systems: the genetic program.
The program.
Yes. A machine is governed by external instructions, but a living thing is seen as having this highly complex internal set of instructions. The program that governs its own self-assembly, its function, its goals. It's the operating system, the code for development and growth that separates life from just a pile of atoms.
That makes the distinction so much clearer. Life is defined by its ability to run its own internal program.
Precisely.
Now, this idea of an internal program in evolutionary history, it forces biology to ask completely different kinds of questions than the physical sciences. When we ask why something biological happens, we can't just stop at one answer.
This is such a crucial point. It's the distinction between proximate and ultimate causality. You always have to ask two different why questions to get the full picture.
Okay, let's start with the immediate stuff, the how. That's proximate causality.
Correct. Proximate causality deals with the how, the immediate chemical, physiological, or environmental factors that cause something to happen. It's all about the machinery running the genetic program. This is the world of molecular biology, of functional morphology. It's what you study in the lab right now.
So the proximate scale is short-term, now and here, and you can usually figure it out with controlled experiments.
Exactly. And the other side of that coin is ultimate causality. This deals with the why in the evolutionary sense, the deep historical factors that led to the origin of the genetic program itself. It's all about natural selection.
And this operates on a much longer time scale, right? The deep evolutionary past of a species. And you can't really do an experiment on that.
No, the method there is inference, built on historical narratives. You're looking at geology, paleontology, things like that.
There's a classic example that makes this really clear, right? Bird migration.
Yes, from J.F. Baker back in 1938. It's the perfect illustration.
So if we ask, why is a bird migrating right now in the spring? The proximate cause is physiological.
It's the change in day length. That triggers hormonal signals in the bird that physically compel it to start its flight. You can measure the hormones, you can measure the light. It's a direct mechanism.
But that doesn't explain why.
It doesn't. The ultimate cause explains why the species evolved to be sensitive to that signal in the first place. The deep reason is that breeding in that particular season ensures the young are raised when there's optimal climate and food, which maximizes the survival of the species over millions of years.
So you can't truly explain migration just by measuring hormones. You have to understand the evolutionary pressures that selected for that behavior. A complete biological explanation has to have both.
Both causal answers, side by side. They're equally valid, and you need them both.
Let's turn now to how these scientific ideas actually change, and how a concept becomes accepted as fact. Because we know the boundary between a theory and a fact can be pretty fluid.
It's very fluid. The genetic code, for instance, moved from a hypothesis to a proven fact really quickly once it was demonstrated. And in biology today, Darwin's core ideas, like the variability of species and common descent, are treated as facts. The evidence is just overwhelming.
But the process of reaching that consensus in biology is often, well, messy. It doesn't really follow that neat model proposed by the historian of science Thomas Kuhn.
No, it doesn't. Kuhn argued that science moves through these long, stable periods of normal science that get punctuated by sudden, dramatic revolutions, a paradigm shift that overturns everything.
And biology isn't like that.
Not really. Look at evolution again. Darwin's theory of natural selection wasn't fully accepted for nearly a century, from 1859 until the 1940s. That was a long, complex period of constant little skirmishes and debates, not some stable period of normal science.
So why does it take so long to reach consensus in the life sciences?
It's because the new ideas aren't just fighting against bad data. They're fighting against deeply entrenched intellectual and ideological concepts, what Mayr calls deep paradigms. Things like creationism or vitalism or teleology.
The belief that there's some purpose or design guiding everything.
Exactly. And those ideas are incredibly hard to dismantle. It's easy to correct a factual error. It's exponentially harder to uproot a fundamental belief system about how the universe works.
You see that resistance even in the physical sciences, right? Like with continental drift.
A perfect example. Wegener proposed it in 1912, but established geophysicists fought it tooth and nail for nearly 50 years until the 1960s. And there was good paleontological evidence supporting it the whole time.
But it just didn't fit the paradigm.
It defied the established paradigm of a rigid, static Earth. The resistance was conceptual, and that just reinforces the idea that biology, more than physics, has to accept plurality and probability and historical narrative. You just can't rely on simple, deterministic, universal laws.
So if we take this entire conceptual framework, we can now apply it to the ultimate question, ourselves. Mayr suggested that understanding our biological roots is really the only way to fulfill that ancient Greek maxim, know thyself.
And when you look at human behavior through this lens, you see this fascinating genetic duality. We have what are called closed programs.
Our hardwired instincts, inflexible reflexes, like a newborn's rooting behavior.
Exactly. But our real evolutionary success hinges on the open program. These are large, flexible areas of the brain that are basically prepared to absorb information, usually very early in life.
This is where we learn language.
Language, complex behaviors, and, this is crucial, our ethical and cultural rules. This open system gives us a tremendous behavioral flexibility that you just don't see in most other species.
And that flexibility helps explain one of the biggest paradoxes in biology, the evolution of altruism. I mean, if natural selection primarily rewards individual success, selfishness, how did non-selfish ethics even evolve?
Well, the framework provides a few mechanisms. First, there's kin selection, or inclusive fitness. Parental care looks altruistic, but from a gene's eye view, it's a selfish act. You're maximizing the survival of your own shared genes.
You're helping a portion of yourself survive. But what about being kind to strangers, people who don't share your genes?
That's where the second mechanism comes in. Reciprocal altruism. This is basically social exchange. I'll scratch your back now if you scratch mine later. This forms the biological root of morality, of trust, of community. Cooperation gives a greater fitness advantage than just going it alone.
And these mechanisms then pave the way for the third step, which is the installation of cultural rules.
Right, rules that are socially ingrained to limit individual selfishness for the benefit of the whole group, usually through a system of rewards and punishments.
And because these rules are installed through our flexible open programs, they aren't universal or set in stone.
Not at all. The sources point out that cultural attitudes toward things like infanticide or high birth rates can differ dramatically based on the immediate environmental pressures of that culture. They adapt.
That adaptability brings us right back to population thinking. We are biologically diverse, variable individuals, but society often aims for philosophical equality.
And Mayr really underscores this. The principle of equality is a necessary social and ethical concept, not a biological one. If we ignore our biological variation and try to force some idea of total biological identity, we just cause harm.
So it's a balancing act.
It is. We have to apply a high sensitivity and a sense of justice to ensure social and ethical equality while recognizing the fundamental biological diversity that's just inherent in who we are.
Okay, so to summarize our deep dive, we've learned that life science is really defined by its recognition of individuality. That's population thinking. Its acceptance of historical narrative, its holistic view of organization through the genetic program, and its crucial distinction between proximate mechanisms and ultimate evolutionary causes.
And that entire framework leaves us with a pretty significant challenge, one that's rooted in our unique biology. Darwin noted the incredible importance of instilling values during the first years of life when the brain is easily affected.
When our open program is most ready to be written.
Exactly.
And as we face these massive modern global crises, overpopulation, resource depletion, environmental collapse, these are problems that require radical shifts in our current ethical standards, which, let's be honest, often favor short-term gain over long-term stability.
Right.
So the provocative thought is this. Given that our societal rules are stored in our culturally flexible open programs, how do we, as a species, collectively evolve the necessary new ethics quickly enough to ensure our future survival? Especially when it requires prioritizing the long-term benefit of the species over the instant gratification of the individual. The ability to answer that lies entirely in our biological capacity for behavioral change.